The wind howled across the open plains, sweeping through the endless stretch of white. Snowflakes swirled like ashes from a dying fire, blinding any soul who dared to wander too far from shelter. The winter had come hard that year, hard enough to break men, harder still to break the land. But still, a lone cowboy rode through it, his horse trudging slow and steady, its breath puffing out in clouds of steam. His name was Eli Carter. Folks in the nearby town of Red Hollow knew him as the Quiet One, the man who never spoke more than a sentence, the man who worked cattle in silence and left as soon as the job was done. But he wasn't quiet out of choice. He was quiet because the world had taken too much from him to leave words worth saying. Eli had lost his wife, Clara, 3 winters back. Fever had taken her, sudden and cruel, and left him with nothing but her locket and a house that no longer felt like home. Since then, he'd been wandering from ranch to ranch, taking work where he could, sleeping under the stars when he couldn't, and drinking just enough whiskey to forget her face for a few hours each night. That day, though, something in him had stirred, a kind of pull, deep and wordless, that told him to ride north instead of east. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the way the clouds had gathered, low and mean, or maybe it was the feeling that someone out there needed help. Whatever it was, he followed it. By sundown, the storm had grown fierce. Snow stung his face, biting into his skin. His horse, Daisy, snorted uneasily, her hooves sinking into the drifts. Eli leaned low over her neck, whispering to calm her, when he thought he heard something, a faint sound, lost in the wind. He pulled the reins and stopped. For a moment, all he could hear was the storm. Then it came again, a cry, weak, distant, but real. Eli kicked his boots against Daisy's sides and rode toward it. The wind fought him every step, but he pushed on, heart thudding. The cry came again, closer now, and then he saw her. Half buried in the snow, curled against a fallen log, was a woman. Her clothes were torn, her face pale as the snow around her. Her hair, dark and tangled, whipped across her cheeks. Eli jumped down and knelt beside her. "Hey," he said, his voice rough and low. "You hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. She was breathing, barely. He brushed the snow from her face and felt the chill of her skin. "Ma'am, you gotta stay with me." He lifted her gently, wrapping his coat around her. She was light, too light. He could feel the tremble of her ribs beneath his arm. He got her onto Daisy and climbed up behind, holding her close to keep her warm. Then he turned toward the hills, where he knew an old trapper's cabin sat empty since last spring. It wasn't far, but in that storm, every mile felt like 10. By the time they reached the cabin, night had fallen. The door creaked on its hinges, snow pushing through the cracks. Eli laid her down on the bed, found kindling by the hearth, and struck a match. The fire caught slow, then grew, lighting the room with a flicker of gold. He peeled off her wet coat and wrapped her in a blanket, rubbing her hands to bring the warmth back. Her lips were blue, but her eyes opened just enough to see him. "You," she whispered, voice trembling. "You found me." "Yeah," he said softly. "You're safe now." She tried to speak again, but her voice broke. He gave her a sip of water from his canteen, and she took it weakly. For a long while, he sat by the fire, watching her breathe. He didn't know who she was, where she'd come from, or why she was out there alone in that godforsaken storm, but he knew she wouldn't have lasted another hour if he hadn't found her. When morning came, she was awake, still pale, but alive. "Name's Eli," he said quietly, handing her a cup of hot coffee. "You got one." She hesitated, her eyes distant. "Nora," she said at last. "Nora Greene." Eli nodded. "What were you doing out there, Nora?" She stared into the fire. "My husband," she whispered. He went out 2 days ago. We were traveling west. Our wagon broke near the river, and he went to find help. I waited, but he never came back. So I went looking." Her voice cracked. Then the storm hit. Eli looked away. He'd seen it before. Travelers caught in winter's jaws, thinking they could make it through. Most didn't. I'm sorry, he said. She shook her head slowly. You saved me. For the next few days, Eli tended to her wounds, shared what little food he had, and kept the fire going. Nora grew stronger, and sometimes she smiled, small, tired smiles that made something ache deep inside him. They talked, late into the nights, about her home back east, about the river towns, about music and sunlight and all the small things people forget to miss. She asked him once if he had someone waiting for him. He stared into the fire a long time before answering. I did, he said. Long time ago. Nora didn't ask more, but she seemed to understand. By the 5th day, the storm began to ease. The sky cleared to a pale blue, and the air was sharp but still. They saddled Daisy and rode out to search for her husband. Nora insisted she had to know. Eli couldn't refuse her. They found the wagon by the frozen river. The canvas was torn, and the snow lay thick inside. A few feet away, near a fallen pine, they found him, her husband, half buried in white. He'd never made it far. Nora fell to her knees beside him, her breath coming in broken gasps. Eli stood a few steps away, hat in hand, eyes closed. He'd buried enough people to know there weren't any right words left to say. When she finally stood, her eyes were red but steady. Thank you, she whispered. They buried him by the river, under a stand of old pines. Nora placed his wedding band atop the mound and let the snow cover it. After that, they rode back to the cabin. She didn't speak much for the rest of the day. Eli didn't press her. He knew grief had its own kind of silence. That night, when the fire burned low, she looked over at him. Why did you help me? Eli shrugged, staring into the flames. Couldn't just leave you out there. She shook her head gently. No, most men wouldn't have come at all. You did. He didn't answer. The truth was, he hadn't been trying to be a hero. He'd just followed that strange pull in his chest, the one that had whispered go north. Now he knew why. Days turned into weeks. Nora stayed on at the cabin. The roads were too dangerous still, and Eli didn't have the heart to leave her alone. Together, they fixed up the place, patched the roof, chopped wood, hunted when the weather allowed. Slowly, warmth returned to the land. Snow melted from the ridges, rivers thawed, and birds began to sing again. And in that quiet thaw, something else began to stir, something Eli thought he'd buried with Clara. It wasn't love, not yet. It was something smaller, gentler, a reason to wake each morning. One evening, as the sun set gold over the hills, Nora sat on the porch, humming softly. Eli listened from the doorway, the tune wrapping around him like a memory. You know, she said, glancing at him, you could come east with me when the roads open. My brother's got land near St. Louis. You could help him work it. Eli looked out across the plains. The thought of leaving the wide open, the dust and sky, felt strange. But so did the thought of being alone again. Maybe, he said quietly, maybe I could. Spring came, and the snows vanished. They packed their things, ready to make the long ride to town. On the morning they left, Eli turned back once to look at the cabin. Smoke rose gently from the chimney, just like the day he'd found her. He thought of Clara, of all the winters since, of the silence that had lived in him so long. Then he looked at Nora, her eyes soft and full of light, and for the first time in years, he felt something like peace. They rode side by side through the blooming fields, the world alive again around them. And somewhere far behind, in that empty cabin beneath the hills, the fire that had saved her still burned, small, steady, and eternal. Because sometimes, in the heart of winter, two broken souls don't just survive. They find the warmth they thought they'd lost forever. And that, Eli Carter would one day tell himself, was the truest kind of salvation the West ever gave.